Now we're getting to a very practical side of things for the adults. Many, many people say to me, I want to learn to forgive, but I don't know how. And so here are our objectives the next half hour. We're going to describe how people go about forgiving, how Agape is actually tied to this, and incorporating these issues into your own life. So often, people say to me, even people coming to this conference have said to me, I am here because I am having some personal difficulties and I want to know how to forgive. I recently had a 35-year-old woman come to me and she said, my husband abandoned me, I have 2 children, I have to get a job, I want to forgive, but quite frankly, I don't know how. So I'm going to introduce you to what we call our guided private reflection. In response to the first question back here, that's how we got started in 1985 by developing this guided private reflection. And we're going to go through this, what we call a process model for the guided private reflection. The process model is the how-to of it all. And the first question I really have for you before we get started is, does it work scientifically? Here's just briefly some of the science. There is a study done by Dr. Suzanne Friedman, who will be talking with you tomorrow, who did what one major scientist said is the very best psychotherapeutic scientific study of any kind, forgiveness, cognitive behaviorism, anything ever published in the history of the social sciences. Dr. Friedman, you'll probably blush in hearing that, but that indeed was this person's idea because she worked with 12 courageous incest survivors, terrible injustice. The vast majority were very kind to her and said, I'm not going to forgive. I'm going to be the one who's not going to let you get a good dissertation here. And Suzanne, in her kindness, said, come anyway. And she met one-on-one with 6 of the incest survivors for an hour a week for over a year. Each one of them forgave, and they went from clinically depressed to non-depressed. The control group, who didn't have the forgiveness intervention, were still clinically depressed. Suzanne then took them under her wing an hour a week for about a year. They too went from clinically depressed to non-depressed. The strongest results ever published in the social sciences on healing from incest. We have worked with emotionally abused women whose post-traumatic stress was high, statistically reduced, Gail Reed and myself. We worked with men, cardiac patients in a hospital. We screened them for having deep injustices against them, and you know what happened 4 months after we engaged in this process model you and I are about to go through? Their heart started functioning better. They had more blood flow through the heart. Okay? Dr. Douglas Russell, the physician who oversaw this study, said we helped them prevent sudden death and chest pains. It's a cause and effect study showing how learning to forgive can affect a major organ of the body. And by the way, this study of cause and effect on forgiveness affecting a major organ of the body, funded by the John Templeton Foundation. Thank you, thank you, thank you, John Templeton Foundation. We've worked with elderly cancer patients, and you know what was going up for the elderly cancer patients when they were dying? Their hope for the future. Huh? Their hope for the future is going up? Yes, because they knew they were leaving their family in a better position than would have been the case without forgiveness. We've done cross-cultural studies, for example, in South Korea with adolescent females, some of whom were incarcerated, and their hostility, their anger went down, and their grades in school went up. We recently did a study in Pakistan of emotionally abused young women, adolescents. And a year after the intervention stopped, their sense of hope was going up. Because you see, they start to develop meaning and purpose in their life. Forgiveness definitely has that kind of effect on the body, on the mind, on the emotions. And we've seen it over and over again. That's why I stopped arm wrestling with those who told me I was foolish. Because they finally saw what was their major issue of importance. Scientific findings, well, there you go. Right? The scientific findings show that this works. So let's go then to the guided private reflection and take a look at this. And this is near and dear to my heart because we have been doing this for about 37 years. Okay? First of all, let's take a look and get settled for yourself in thinking about your own situation in life where someone might have deeply hurt you. And I have a preliminary that has nothing to do with that at first. I first want you to reflect on receiving agape love from another person. Think about one time in your life, from early childhood to now, where someone reached out to you when you were suffering, and they had no personal gain on it. Who was this? How did the person comfort you? How did you feel when it happened? Here's what I want you to remember, and it's very important. This is now very real in you. This happened. This is part of your history. And there's no taking it back. This person helped you, and it's real. And I want that to absorb inside of you. Now take a look at a giving of agape love to someone in your life where you unconditionally reached out to another person when it was difficult, and there was going to be no reward in it for you at all. There's going to be no headlines in the New York Times newspaper. Who was that person you helped? How did you comfort the person? And how did you feel, and how are you feeling now when that happened? Did you ever think about that before? That what you and I just described in this last 1 minute is part of your history? It's part of who you are as a person? And this is very real. This is concrete. This has happened to you. It's part of, if you think about it, your identity as a human being. Bring these two themes of agape love now into the realm of your own pain. We're going to go through the process model of forgiveness with 4 phases. The preliminaries are for you to pick out one event with one person who hurt your heart. For some of you, that person broke your heart. That person did damage to you, and that's why you're here today. Who was it? What was that event like, even if it was 30 years ago? Who is this person? What was said? What was done? How did you respond to that? We're not going to dwell on that. And instead, we're going to look at what happened afterwards. Okay? So let's now go into the process model, phase 1 of 4, which is to uncover whether it's your anger, your sadness, your disappointment, your frustration, doesn't matter. But I want to ask you some effects. As Mr. Little said, remember, someone was carrying the effects of what happened 30 years later. When we worked with the people in hospice who were dying of cancer, some of them were carrying the effects of injustice for 40 years in their heart. Think about this one person and this one event in your life, and let me go through some effects. Not all of the effects will be yours, but many of them very well might be. First of all, have you avoided thinking about the actual anger or sadness or disappointment where you shoved it under the rug because you don't want to deal with it? And that's all right. That's honorable. It's a defense mechanism of denial. And defense mechanisms are good to a point because they keep us from a pain we can't handle right now. The problem is, if that denial stays with you and you need to be cleansed, then it's not your friend anymore. Have you been in denial about the amount of pain you've been carrying in your heart for the last week, month, or 30 years? Have you faced your anger or pain? On a 1 to 10 scale. In the United States, if you have a sports injury, I've had my share, and you go into the doctor, there'll be like a measurement on the wall from 1 to 10 of a absolutely weeping, crying face, all the way to everything's fine, okay? And 1 would be really awful. Where are you on the 1 to 10 scale? 10, the sun is shining right now in your heart? Or are you closer to the 3 or the 2 or the 1 in the darkness? Where is your heart regarding the person who hurt you last week, last month, or 30 years ago? Do you have any shame or guilt? You know, a lot of times we do when people treat us unfairly. They whisper, what did you do to cause it? You might have done nothing, but you might be carrying shame, which is others shining light on you, and you want to duck down and don't want to face that. It's not fair. You don't deserve the shame any more than you deserve the anger or the sadness. But do you have some? It's okay to admit, because forgiveness can help. Has the anger affected your health? Do you know what the most common complaint I get? I'm a licensed psychologist as well as an egghead professor, okay? And you know what the most common complaint I get for health issues when people have been crushed by the injustices of others? Fatigue, being tired. You see, if you're carrying around a sack of woes on your back every day, and you're not getting rid of that, that can weigh you down. And that's not fair. You don't deserve that, because you don't deserve to have to go through life struggling to come to a conference like this when you are very tired. It's not fair. Right? Another effect to keep in mind. Have you been obsessed about the injury, thinking about it over and over? David Keel obsessed. Remember, he was in his wheelchair, thinking about the man who shot him. He's going around on 2 good legs, and here I am in a wheelchair. He obsessed over and over and over. Right? I once worked with a 22-year-old young man whose father used to beat him as a child. He had a dream of his father chasing him, literally, every night he went to bed. He forgave, and the dream left. Right? Do you compare your situation with the other? Sometimes when I work with abuse victims, like domestic abuse victims, they say, everyone tells me how wonderful my partner is until you get this person behind closed doors and ay. Everyone's telling me how great this person is. And that comparison of who you see the person as being and who the person is to others is another effect. It makes the person even angrier because everyone is thinking, what's going on, right? And has the injury that you have suffered that's personal to you, and you know, if we had a show and tell right now, some of your stories would make us weep. I know that from experience, right? Has it changed your life? Oftentimes when we're treated very unfairly by others, it changes our life. We have to start new relationships or a new job, okay, move to another part of the country or another part of the world, and it's not fair because of how you've been treated. And then the one that I find that's oftentimes missed that is rather sinister is a changed worldview. When people are treated very unfairly by others, they tend to get so pessimistic, they think nobody can ever be trusted again. I can never enter into a good relationship with anybody else. I can never have a good work environment. Everyone is out for number one, and number one is themselves. People get so pessimistic that it's hard to enter into relationships. And that can happen without people even realizing it. And people who used to have a faith sometimes end up with saying, the deity made me do this, and they get mad at God. Well, that's not good theology, ladies and gentlemen, okay? It's confusing who hurt you. But people can drift away from a faith that used to give them very much comfort because they've changed their worldview, and they're not even aware of that this is happening. Then we hit the decision phase. Forgiveness is not just a decision. It's part of the journey. It's part of putting on your backpack and walking up the hill. The decision is, I will try this. I will try to get rid of the resentment, and I will try to offer goodness and not excuse. I may or may not reconcile. I won't abandon justice. I'm not going to forget. I'll remember in new ways. It's important you know what you're getting into. You don't get on your backpack and say, I am going to go to Taiwan, and you end up in Mexico. Well, if you say, I'm going to go on forgiveness, and you treat it as excusing, you're not going to Taiwan. You're taking a detour to Mexico. And so it's very important you know where you're heading. And you're heading in a realm of a moral virtue that is giving goodness to others who have not been good to you without excusing, necessarily reconciling, and not throwing justice under the bus. And we give people a homework assignment, and we say this: are you willing to go on this journey with me? Are you willing to put on your backpack and take it a step at a time on our journey together? If so, I want you to commit today, in this convocation here today, the 19th of July, 2022, to commit, before you walk out of here, to do no harm to the one who hurt you. That would mean not talking badly about the person if the person's deceased, right? Not disparaging the person, not getting back at the person. Can you decide to do no harm? You notice I'm not asking you to love that person. I'm not saying, hey, wrap your arms around the person. I'm saying refrain from the negative. It's much easier to refrain from the negative to engage in the positive. We meet the positive much later in the journey. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to make a commitment to do no harm? If so, then we enter into the work phase. We're rolling up our sleeves. That's why we call it the work phase, okay? What we're doing here is hitting the forgiveness gym. We're becoming forgivingly fit, okay? We're becoming forgivingly fit here because we're going to do the work. We start with thinking exercises because it's easier to think than to feel regarding the one who hurt you. And we have three kinds of cognitive exercises we call personal, global, and cosmic perspectives. For the personal perspective, I ask you to think about this person and this person's own history. What was life like for this person as a toddler, as a child, as an adolescent? Who hurt this person who hurt you? How did this person stumble in life? What kind of angers built up where the person was never introduced to forgiveness? What has happened to make this person's heart so filled with resentment that the person ended up giving you an injustice you didn't deserve? What has been going on in this person's life? You know what we have found most of the time? Wounded people wound other people. And we rarely see that because we define the person by what they did to us, not who they have been. I'm not excusing. I'm not finding any kind of condonation here and say, oh, well, it's okay. The person was beaten up by a parent. Well, go ahead and beat me up. No, no, no. What the person did to you was unfair, is unfair, and it will always be unfair. But I want you to see a human being who's wounded. The global perspective brings up the level a little bit more to abstraction, where we see that you both share inherent worth, basic worth, that is not earned, it's unconditional. Why? The fact that you are both human beings. You both have unique DNA, except if you're identical twins, but they still have uniqueness, okay? But they share, okay? But most of the time we have unique DNA. You have unique DNA, the one who hurt you has unique DNA. You share that. If you cut, you bleed. The one who hurt you, did you know if that person cuts, that person will bleed? You both need adequate nutrition. Both of you will die one day. You both share a common humanity. Right? You share that, which makes each of you special, unique, and irreplaceable. I know that's hard to hear when you've just put on your forgiveness backpack, you've just started walking this journey, and I'm asking you to see the worth of the other. Suzanne Friedman worked with people for over a year. We're doing it to introduce it to you. Right? And then the cosmic perspective happens for people of faith. We don't go here if a person is more of a materialist who says everything begins and ends with biology. But if someone has more of a transcendent view, we ask this question. And it comes right out of Genesis 1, the Hebrew scriptures that have been adapted by others. Are you made in the image and likeness of God? It's repeated, by the way, there. Made in the image and likeness of God. Are you? Are you made in the image and likeness of God? How about the one who hurt you? Is that person made in the image and likeness of God? When you put it all together, listen to who the other is who hurt you. Is this person only a beast who crushed your heart? Or is this person someone who was blindsided by someone who hurt this person and might have been hurt by another person and another person, where this person is carrying a wounded heart and no one has ever shared agape love and forgiveness with the person? This person is special, unique, and irreplaceable and shares that exactly with you. And you are both made in the image and likeness of God. When you put all of that together and focus on your heart, when I tell that story about who this person is more than the injustices against you. What's your heart like? Is it still on the 1 to 10 scale of the sports medicine graphic, the darkness of it all? Or is it moving a little bit more toward the light? If it's moving more toward the light, that's compassion, ladies and gentlemen, which is a willingness to suffer along with another person who might have been deeply hurt by others, never had the chance to get rid of that, and you are the recipient of it. And I'm sorry you are. But there's more to this person, and if your heart starts softening a little bit, you know what's happening to your resentment? It's chipping away, and it's going to be starting to be a little bit less. And once you have a new story of that other person and your heart starts softening a bit, I ask you to then stand in the pain. Stand in the pain. Right? Hospice workers tell us that when they counsel the grieving. They say, lean into the pain. Okay? So this isn't something that's necessarily new. Right? As you lean into the pain and stand in that pain, you know what you realize? You're stronger than you ever thought you were. You can stand with this pain, with a sack of woes on your back, do no harm to the other, and you begin seeing the other in a much broader context. And you know what happens to that sack on your back? This is 37 years of experience talking. It slowly starts to lighten, and slowly starts to lighten, where one day you can stand up and say, I am standing in the pain for the other, and it's not crushing me. And as I stand in this pain, I can see that this person deserves for me to stand in the pain, and I'm stronger than I ever thought I was. Who am I as a person who can stand in the pain of others who are hurting me? You start changing your identity of who you are, not just the one who hurt you. And only after you're strong enough then to bear that pain do we then go to what truly the forgiveness theme is, which is a moral virtue, where we ask the question, can you now in your heart give a gift to the one who hurt you? Maybe it's a smile, maybe it's a returned phone call, maybe it's donating to a charity in the person's name if the person's deceased. You see, you can even forgive those who've died. Right? And it's that giving of the gift that we find that's absolutely transitional to uniting forgiveness with love. You're now uniting forgiveness with agape because you are giving through your pain. And in that giving, paradoxically, is where you then might indeed experience healing that you didn't think was possible. Which then gets us to phase 4, and we have 4 phases, where you start finding meaning in your suffering. I work in corrections quite a bit. Okay? My friend Sylvester Jackson is going to talk with you about that near the end of day 2. Okay? And you know what I find a lot of times? Those who are in corrections tell me, here's something typical. I'm going to be in here for the rest of my life, the person says to me, but I now know what it is to suffer. And this person next to me has probably suffered an awful lot too, and I haven't been aware of it. I am now going to be aware of the suffering of those who are going through this with me. And we develop new meaning in suffering. You know what that is? Sensitivity to other people's suffering that you never realized before. As you walk by people today in our next break, you know what? That person might have a broken heart. You start seeing that more clearly. You start seeing as well that you have needed to seek forgiveness from others. You have needed forgiveness from others because you've done wrong. You realize you're not alone. A lot of times we go through this with others, and we develop a new purpose in life. Again, in corrections, I typically find this. The people will say to me, not only am I attuned to suffering, I am now attuned to helping them who are suffering to overcome it. Okay? They're not saying I'm going to become a licensed psychologist. They're saying I can help the one who's next to me heal the heart because I now know the pathway. And then now developing new meaning and purpose in life helps people develop that hope for the future that I've been talking about. Because you see there's a new way rather than bitterness. And when you get to that point, you experience the paradox of forgiving, which is, as you reach out to others, you then are the one who is healed. The process model is one pathway. It's not the necessary pathway. There are other pathways. By necessary, I mean you have to go through all 20 of these steps we just went through. No. Some of you will go through, some will not. All right? But if you go through a lot of them, it'll probably work. I think of the process model more as a sufficient condition for change. If you go through it, it's sufficient for the day, for the year, for your life. The paradoxes of forgiving are, you are hurt by the other, and instead of hurting back, you heal. The world would tell you, if you're hurt, you hurt back. Well, the paradox is, you're hurt, you end up deliberately not hurting. And as you offer mercy and agape love as best you can on your journey with me to the other, You are the one who is healed. And we've seen it over and over and over again. Dr. Friedman, thank you for your heroic study with incest survivors. You healed them. That's a paradox. How could an incest survivor heal by offering goodness to the man who brutalized her? That's the controversy of forgiveness, and that is the beauty of forgiveness. One last question. When we got to the global perspective, I said, we're all going to die one day. You're going to die one day, I'm going to die one day. It's part of the human condition, and you share that with the one who hurt you. What are you going to leave behind in this world when you pass away? Are you going to leave the bitterness and the resentment that's an unwelcome guest and doesn't even have the decency to leave? And are you going to leave that to your relatives, your children, your coworkers, your community? Or are you going to leave a legacy of love because you have walked a journey that's hard, that's heroic? By coming to this conference, I think I've put you at a crossroads. Sorry, okay? The crossroads is this: at the end of your life, what will you leave behind? More bitterness, so that your children's 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 children will have to wonder, how can I get rid of this? Or are you going to be a conduit of good on a journey that's uphill with a backpack on your shoulder that pays great dividends, and you offer love to others? And think about this. 100 years from now, your children's children's children might have something of you in their heart. You ever think about that? Your love today could be alive and well in the hearts of others 100 years from now. Which do you choose? Thank you.